Hey, what's up, guys? This is Ricky V, and today you're listening to episode number 28 of the Elite Fitness Podcast. And in this episode, we're going to get into the differences between cutting cycles, bulking cycles, and recomp cycles. Now, yeah, this sounds like a steroids 101 topic, right? We all know what those are, but I'm going to go over them and just get a little bit more into detail on what the difference really is in the way you execute a cutting cycle versus a bulking versus a recomp cycle. So, starting off with cutting cycles. Now, cutting cycle, you're basically trying to cut and eliminate body fat while holding on to as much of your mass as you possibly can. We all know that when you start to lose some body fat, even with resistance training, you can also lose some muscle mass along the way. Now, we use the steroids, we use the anabolics to create a synthetic, unnatural environment in our bodies so that you'll continue to hold on to that mass and retain that muscle mass even as you're going into a caloric deficit, even though you're going to calorie depletion. But your body will prefer to use energy stored in body fat while sparing the muscle mass. We all know that when your calories get low, your muscles will also get smaller because the energy inside of the muscles is used up to move around, get places. And so that muscle decreases in size. It begins to use up the stored energy it has. In a caloric deficit environment, the muscles do not get to replenish their energy as quickly as they're using it. And so the muscles begin to fall flat, not look as impressive. And the steroids are there to keep that muscle anabolic, to keep it continuing to draw energy from the blood supply and continue that to make that muscle strong and large, even when there is a caloric deficit going on in the rest of your body. It's quite impressive the way these steroids work in a regular cutting cycle. They maintain that muscle mass protected so that you can drop your calories way down and you'll just get leaner. Your skin will get paper thin. And this is how the best bodybuilders achieve that look going into a show. Obviously, as we've discussed on the podcast before, there's some diuretic use that may go along in the last couple of days as they also deplete the water out of the body to show off that paper thin skin. But for the most part, to even get down into the lower single digit body fat percentages, right, leading up to the show, to really lose that body fat, the way to do it is tons of steroids and a good caloric deficit. And then when you do feed, you're getting in some really good, clean calories. By clean calories, I mean, guys, proteins and good fats. And if you're having some carbohydrates, they are complex carbohydrates that are not just going to hit your system and spike your insulin up and then back down. No, really kind of long-acting carbohydrates, good fats, omega-3, 6, and 9 fats. Now, along with a good steroid stack for cutting, many guys will add some stimulants to the mix. And by stimulants, the most common ones we know about are stuff like clenbuterol, albuterol. You got something like ephedra that's been quite effective for a lot of guys. And also you got some guys using DMP. Now DMP is sort of in a category of his own. It's a mitochondrial uncoupler. And basically what it does is it makes the mitochondria in your cells create way more energy, burn way more calories than they normally would. Now, this causes some pretty immediate and drastic fat loss. The side effects are something to be afraid of. You're going to have heat, exhaustion, yellow, smelly sweat, just not feeling great at all for days as your body begins to burn more energy. DMP is quite dangerous, and there have been a lot of people that have died from it. It's very effective at what it does, which is burn body fat. But man, it's dangerous. I mean, DMP has been used as a pesticide. And when some of these critters get the DMP in their system, their body will overheat, almost cook to death. It's kind of what ends up happening to your body when you mess with DMP, we did a good podcast on DMP on the Evolutionary Radio channel. Check out evolutionary.org for the podcast section. And there you'll be able to find quite easily, if you use the search bar, our DMP podcast. And there you are. That's how you begin building a good, solid cutting cycle. You get some drugs, some compounds that'll help you burn some of these calories quicker, that'll help you keep your energy going. Even if you're going into a deep caloric deficit, you want to still have your wits about you and still be motivated and driven enough to continue to lift weights, and continue to exercise. Continuing to lift weights is important because you want to continue to signal that muscle to stay strong, stay big, stay hard, because it's necessary for all of our daily activities. Adding, obviously, the stimulants. I don't personally dive into stimulants as much, but I like fasting. So I take a different approach, which maybe you should try as well, which is basically I cut back on the amount of calories I eat quite a lot, and then continue to train, and don't use any of the fat loss stimulants, where someone else might eat maybe some more calories than I am and use some of the fat burning agents like clenbuterol, albuterol, DMP, which I don't recommend DMP at all. You could die from it, and I don't give people advice on compounds like that. But for the purposes of this podcast, which is just going over what the modern day protocols are for cutting, bulking, and recomp cycles, I have to mention DMP. I couldn't just ignore it completely. So yeah, I mean, you taking some of these stimulants, fat burners, are just helping you burn more calories and also continue to have good energy output, and feel good as far as energetically goes, even while you're depleted down in calories and eating every day less calories than your body really needs. That's where your fat loss comes from. You're forcing your body to basically use the fat that's stored, use that for energy, since you're not getting in enough calories. Like I was saying on my end, I like to just cut the calories down way lower. Going into just full out fasting, water fasting, a couple of days along with caloric deficit. I like to cut the calories way down and just not use clenbuterol at all or albuterol at all, because I feel as though if I'm going to use those compounds and then just eat more calories, I could just save my body the stress, the shock of having to use some of these additional drugs, and just make up or create what those drugs could be doing in my body, created through just harder dieting, not being a baby about it, and really getting the diet way down, way down. So what drugs, as far as anabolics, would you use on a cutting cycle? Now, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you guys, you could use pretty much any steroid you want. What really makes or breaks a cutting cycle is, are you in a caloric deficit or not? That's kind of where it goes. And obviously, are you eating clean or not? But you really can use any steroid. Now, the reason guys won't use just any steroid is because most people cutting are trying to achieve a certain look. They're in the mirror watching themselves. Some of them have a certain date they have to look a certain way by. Either it's a self-imposed goal, or maybe you have a show, or maybe you have some kind of a commitment, modeling or whatnot. And so you want to look a certain way by a certain date. Now, when it comes to these steroids, guys will favor for cutting cycles. Guys will use the steroids that give you the most results aesthetically. That'll make you look more aesthetically pleasing as you are cutting down. And these will usually be along the lines of Anavar, Winstrol, Primobolan, Masteron. And those are going to be basically your more hardcore ones. I hope I'm not missing one offhand. I mean, Turinabol can also be used quite a bit. There are other things out there like Carterin, GW, that's used for cutting. IGF-1 even is really used for cutting. That's a peptide. Human growth hormone, definitely a good agent for cutting. And these are all good cutting agents. And although you can use testosterone and DECA and even Dianabol and just get on a caloric deficit and you will lose body fat, the reason those aren't used is because they're not cleaning up your physique, your look. They're not making your skin, your body more defined as this happens. They're really not. While something like Anavar, something like Winstrol will dry you up pretty nicely. Will actually remove some of the water from under your skin where you're taking it. Masteron will also give you a very nice aesthetic look. Even though some guys out there think that the effects from Masteron are kind of short-lived. So on a good cutting cycle, you definitely would drop the calories down. Definitely would use, most guys will use something like clenbuterol, butyrol, ephedrine, DMP. If you want a real natural, good alternative, you can use my product, N2Burn. Go to needtobuildmuscle.com. And then there you will, in the fat burner section, you will find N2Burn. And the number 2 burn. It's a great product for anyone looking to drop some body fat. Also, there are other compounds that bodybuilders cutting up to a show will use, like metformin and some other ways of kind of modulating the way insulin works. I have a product called N2Slin. Check it out. It's www.n2slin.com. N2slin.com. Check it out. It's a great way to just modulate the way insulin works so that your body is making more muscle mass from the calories you eat and burning more body fat when it needs calories. So it's a great product. And you put this whole thing together. You put together a good caloric deficit, a good way to modulate insulin, maybe something to help your fat loss and your caloric expenditure, along with giving you some energy. And obviously the anabolics. And what I mean by anabolics, I'm talking about steroids, peptides, and also obviously SARMs. And all of those are just there to kind of help you maintain that muscle mass, continue to have that hard muscular shape, even as you're losing body fat. That's your classic cutting cycle. For the purposes of this podcast, I'm not laying out full cutting cycle plans. You can go to elitefitness.com and search for cutting cycle plans, and you'll definitely hit a ton of good information on elitefitness.com about how to cycle. Or you can reach out to me. Go to rickyvrock.com. That's RICKY, V as in victory, ROCK.com. And there you'll find my social connects. You can hit me up right up on social and ask me about some cutting cycles if you have some questions. So moving on now to bulking. What is a bulking cycle? Bulking cycle is when we're trying to gain the highest amount of mass, the most mass we can possibly gain. And we're not worried about gaining some body fat along the way. We're hoping to gain as many pounds of solid muscle mass as we can. And we're sort of expecting to gain some body fat mass along the way. And this really is not a problem. This is just kind of built into the plan. Most guys will run bulking and cutting cycles, bulking and cutting. You use the bulking cycles to just gain huge amounts of mass. And then you use a cutting cycle to get rid of all that body fat and actually be left with a very lean, clean physique for a show, photo shoot, whatever it might be. And then you want to get bigger after that. You want to go on to the next levels, the next steps of being massive. So you run another bulking cycle, huge bulking cycle, and you'd end up a lot heavier usually than you were after your first bulking cycle, because you still have some of that mass from the first one, right? And then once you gain that mass, you go again, cutting cycle, to show off all of that hard work. And this was the classic way of doing cycles many, many years ago. Now, for bulking, guys will prefer steroids like Dianabol, Anadrol, high amounts of testosterone, DECA, Nandrolone. Some of these are like the classic bulking steroids because they create more mass, not just lean muscle mass, but you also create some water retention when you first start using them. And that additional water retention really helps with your strength, with your power output, with your recovery. That additional water mass, guys really feel as though it helps them lift heavier, lift longer, recover quicker. So that additional water mass is actually welcomed by the bodybuilders that are using these compounds, because it just makes their body way more adapt to growing and having some good gains come along the way. Now, you could also bulk on Anavar and bulk on Primobolan and Masteron. You could do this, but definitely when it comes to putting on the size, you talk about sheer size. Your Dianabols, your Anadrol, your Nandrolones are just going to be that much better for that particular purpose. You're going to see bigger, faster gains, not just in body size, but also in strength. So that's very important. Now, the most important part to bulking, and I'm talking to a lot of you hard gainers out there. A lot of guys out there say, I'm a hard gainer. Can't gain too much. I'm just a small guy, whatever your excuse is. Maybe you have a pretty active thyroid that's burning up a ton of calories and continues to burn up more calories the more you put in it, right? That could happen. But the main problem guys have bulking is you're just not eating enough. When you're bulking, you have to eat enough. And if you're subscribing to the wisdom, the bodybuilding wisdom about protein intake, the bro wisdom about protein intake is you're taking 1 or 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. So even in a situation where let's say you're 200 pounds and you're trying to get up to 220 pounds, 230 pounds with your bulking cycle, 30 pounds of gain for a good bulking cycle is not unheard of. It's actually right in line with what someone that size can make. Now, when you create your diet program, you have to eat like a 230-pound guy. You're not going to get to 230 pounds eating like a 200-pound guy. You got to be a 200-pound guy that eats like a 230-pound guy as you're stacking on the steroids and you're hitting the gym, hitting the weights pretty hard. So this is where you are going to actually be able to create that growth, is eating like that guy. Diet is very important in both aspects, whether you're cutting or whether you're bulking. Definitely diet is the be-all. If you're taking a steroid like Trenbolone, or let's say like Superdrol in your steroid cycle, you definitely need to eat enough. Trenbolone is one of those steroids that can give you some awesome mass gains in your bulking cycle, but you definitely need to be eating enough calories. Some guys will need to eat beyond hunger, beyond being full and into being in a little bit of pain. Some guys will need to force feed a little bit. I've heard stories from bodybuilders. I've even recommended this in my other podcast. You just blend, like in a blender, your chicken breast with rice, with bone broth or chicken broth, with a little bit of spinach, and just create a goo that's really easy to get down. You don't have to chew through a lot, because when you're bulking, you have to do a lot of chewing. That's a lot of chicken, a lot of beef, a lot of lean meats, veggies, things like that you really need to be taking in to not only get the protein, but also get some of that fiber in so your body can process that protein out. And so when you do all of this, you're really going to stress your jaw. Some guys get pain on their jaw muscles from chewing so much. And so being able to gulp down some really some goo that's heavy in calories, like putting chicken broth, bone broth in a blender with rice, with chicken breast, can actually really work for you. So in bulking, the main aspect of it really, man, is getting those calories down, getting those calories in, making sure that you eat enough calories every single day to have a surplus of calories that can then be stored as much of it as muscle, good bit of it is fat, definitely there'll be some water retention ongoing with this. And those are your classic bulking cycles. I mean, testosterone, dianabol, deca, anadrol maybe in the place of the dianabol. Equipoise is great. Equipoise could be used for both cutting in and bulking. Equipoise maybe doesn't give you a lot of that aesthetically pleasing look the way Masteron, Anavar, and Winstrol would. It's also not going to create a lot of that big water retention the way Dianabol and Anadrol would. But Equipoise is a good all-around steroid. Trenbolone is great for both. Good all around. You can add a little bit of Trenbolone into your Winstrol and Masteron cycle for cutting, and you're going to look great. Or you could drop a little bit of Trenbolone in along with your testosterone, Dianabol, and Nandrolone stack, and you're going to be growing big. So the main factor, the main thing you need to be worried about when it comes to bulking is really getting the calories in. I can't stress that enough. And I guess I keep stressing it because that is the number one weak link where guys fail when it comes to their bulking cycles. They fail because they're just not taking in enough calories. Their caloric intake is just not where it needs to be. So you'll see a lot of guys who hit the gym, hit a lot of steroids, are trying to really gain the mass and just can't. They just can't gain the mass. They're just unable to gain that mass. Why are they unable to gain the mass? Quite simply, it is just the darn caloric intake. The darn caloric intake is just not there. Even if you're just not eating enough, you're not bulking. Same as with your cutting cycle. If you're not on a real caloric deficit, you're not really going to be bulking. You're not really going to be cutting. I'm sorry. You're not going to be cutting unless you're depleted in calories. Yes, even if you don't lose body fat, just using something like Anavar or Masteron, Winstrol, can actually make you look a little bit leaner, clean up your physique a little bit, your look. But it's just not that solid, hard cutting look that you get when you are actually really cutting. So diet really is going to determine what your body does. The steroids, at their best, the steroids are going to help your muscles either grow quicker or going to help your muscles maintain their muscle mass during the caloric deficit. Or the steroids are just going to help your muscles or during bulking to take just in more of that protein, more of those calories when you're taking them in, when you're ingesting them, or they're going to help your body kind of keep and hold on to the mass while you're cutting, while you're on a caloric deficit. But that's about it. The steroids don't really dictate whether you're cutting or bulking. You could sort of use any stack of steroids for either or purpose. There's just some that are better at giving you the result than others. Now, when it comes to recomposition cycles, you're basically trying to lose body fat at the same time that you gain muscle mass. And this is one of the hardest things anyone can do. This is one of the hardest moves for any bodybuilder to make. Trying to get down in body fat is gaining size in your muscles. And recomp cycles deserve their very own podcast. So you got to join us again next week, episode number 29 of the Elite Fitness Podcast, where I will go into depth all about recomp cycles. What are the best drug combinations to use, the best auxiliary drugs? What is the best diet and training practice for anyone out there trying to achieve a really good recomp cycle? So, signing out. Have a good day, guys, and I'll see you here next week. And as always, here's the disclaimer. Please remember, I'm not a doctor. None of what I say should be regarded as medical advice. You need to first contact your own doctor and check with your own medical professional before taking any drugs. None of the statements I've made about any supplements are approved by the FDA. So none of the products I discussed on this podcast are meant to cure or diagnose any diseases. Make sure you see your doctor before you take any supplements or drugs.